The North Atlantic Treaty Organization often finds itself at the center of a familiar debate. It is a debate about numbers, specifically the target for each member to spend 2% of its GDP on defense. While this figure dominates headlines and political speeches, it masks a much deeper and more significant conversation. The true measure of an ally's commitment cannot be found solely on a balance sheet. It is also a question of responsibility, of leadership, and of who truly owns the security of the European continent. Focusing only on financial contributions misses the point. It's kind of like judging a company's health by looking only at its revenue, without considering its strategy, its leadership, or its vision for the future. This conversation is not new, but it has gained a powerful urgency in our current geopolitical climate. The war in Ukraine has served as a stark, brutal reminder that peace in Europe is not a given. It must be actively secured and defended. In this new reality, the concept of burden sharing must evolve. It must transition from a simple accounting exercise to a more profound distribution of strategic responsibility. Leadership is, in many ways, the ultimate form of burden sharing. When a nation or a continent takes the helm, it signals a fundamental commitment that transcends mere financial outlays. It demonstrates a willingness to make the hardest decisions and bear the ultimate consequences for its own defense. Consider this. Money buys equipment, it pays for soldiers, and it funds infrastructure. But it does not, by itself, create strategy. It does not forge the political will necessary to act in a crisis. And it does not build the deep trust among allies that is the very foundation of a collective security pact like NATO. Placing a European in the alliance's top military command post, the Supreme Allied Commander Europe, would be a powerful symbol. But it would be far more than symbolic. It would signal a maturity and a readiness on the part of Europe to take primary ownership of its own defense, fundamentally rebalancing the transatlantic relationship for a new era of challenges. Therefore, as we discuss defense spending targets, we must broaden our perspective. The debate should not be whether European nations are paying their fair share, but whether they are shouldering their fair share of the leadership burden. True security is built not just on dollars and cents, but on a shared sense of purpose and a clear-eyed acceptance of responsibility. The question of who commands NATO's forces in Europe goes to the very heart of this issue. It is a question that will define the future effectiveness and, indeed, the very soul of the Atlantic Alliance as it navigates an increasingly perilous world. To understand why a European Supreme Allied Commander Europe is a revolutionary idea, one must first appreciate the history that made an American commander the norm. The tradition is not an accident of history, but a direct product of the world that emerged from the ashes of World War II. In 1949, when NATO was founded, Europe was economically devastated and militarily weak. The United States, by contrast, was an industrial and military colossus, possessing the sole nuclear arsenal in the Western world. It was the only power capable of standing as a credible deterrent to an expansionist Soviet Union. The arrangement was a matter of simple, pragmatic necessity. The role of Supreme Allied Commander Europe has, since its inception with General Dwight D. Eisenhower in 1951, always been held by a senior American military officer. This was a deliberate choice. It served as the most tangible and visible guarantee of America's commitment to defend Europe. Having an American general in charge of the integrated military command meant that any attack on a NATO member in Europe was, in effect, an attack on American forces and American leadership. This arrangement was the linchpin of deterrence. It sent an unambiguous message to Moscow. The full might of the United States, including its nuclear umbrella, was inextricably linked to the security of Western Europe. This structure provided stability and clarity throughout the Cold War. The United States provided the ultimate security guarantee, the strategic nuclear deterrent, and the bulk of the alliance's high-end military capabilities. In return, European nations contributed forces, provided strategic territory for bases, and stood as the front line against the Warsaw Pact. It was a clear, if asymmetrical, bargain that served both sides of the Atlantic well for decades. The American Supreme Allied Commander Europe was the operational embodiment of this grand strategy, a sentinel watching over a fragile peace, backed by the unparalleled power of his home country. But the world of 1951 is not the world of 2025. The logic that underpinned this historic arrangement, while sound for its time, deserves re-examination. The Cold War is over, the Soviet Union is gone, and Europe is no longer a continent of broken nations. It is a collective economic powerhouse, with sophisticated modern militaries of its own. The unquestioned unipolar moment of American dominance has given way to a more complex, multipolar world. The historical reasons for exclusive American leadership, while important to acknowledge, may no longer be as compelling as they once were. The foundation has shifted, and the structure built upon it must be reassessed. The strategic landscape of the 21st century bears little resemblance to the bipolar standoff of the Cold War. Today, the United States finds its attention and resources increasingly pulled toward the Indo-Pacific. The rise of China represents a long-term systemic challenge that demands a significant reorientation of American foreign policy, military posture, and economic strategy. This is not a matter of choice, but a geopolitical reality. While America remains committed to its transatlantic partners, it cannot afford to be singularly focused on European security in the way it once was. The pivot to Asia is real, and it has profound implications for the division of labor within NATO. This shift in American priorities coincides with a dramatic resurgence of security threats on Europe's own doorstep. Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022 shattered any lingering illusions of a permanent post-Cold War peace. Moscow has demonstrated its willingness to use brutal military force to redraw borders and challenge the international order. This direct conventional threat is primarily a threat to Europe. It is European cities that are within range of Russian missiles, European economies that are most affected by the conflict's fallout, and European societies that are absorbing millions of refugees. The epicenter of the most immediate threat to the alliance is now squarely in Europe. This new reality demands a new response. It calls for Europe to assume a more proactive and leading role in its own defense. While American support remains vital, the primary responsibility for deterring and, if necessary, defending against Russian aggression must fall to the European powers themselves. This requires more than just increased spending. It requires a mindset shift. It means developing a European strategic culture that is less dependent on Washington for direction and more confident in its own ability to lead. Appointing a European Supreme Allied Commander Europe would be the single most powerful catalyst for such a transformation, forcing a level of ownership that has been absent for decades. Europe today has the capacity to take on this role. The combined GDP of NATO's European members dwarfs that of Russia. They possess large, technologically advanced militaries and a vast industrial base. Nations like the United Kingdom and France are nuclear powers with global force projection capabilities. Germany is undergoing a Zeitenwende, a historic turning point in its security policy, backed by massive new investment. The pieces are there. What is needed is the political will to assemble them into a coherent, European-led defense architecture under the NATO umbrella. The changing world does not make American leadership obsolete, but it does make European leadership essential. Proposing a European to command NATO's forces naturally raises a set of legitimate and serious concerns. These are not trivial objections and must be addressed with clarity. The first major hurdle is the question of command authority over American troops. How could a European general give orders to United States forces, especially in a high-stakes conflict? The answer, however, already exists within NATO's integrated structure. Foreign officers routinely command American units in joint operations, and vice versa. It is the position, not the nationality, that confers authority. An American SACEUR commands German, British, and Polish troops today. A European SACEUR would command American troops tomorrow under the very same established NATO protocols. A second, more profound concern revolves around America's nuclear deterrent. The SACEUR plays a crucial role in NATO's nuclear planning and consultative processes. Some worry that placing a European in this position could complicate the chain of command or decouple the United States nuclear guarantee from European security. This fear is understandable but misplaced. The ultimate authority to release American nuclear weapons rests exclusively with the President of the United States. This would not change. A European SACEUR would operate within the same strict framework of political control as an American one, facilitating consultation but holding no unilateral launch authority. The credibility of the United States nuclear umbrella is based on American political will, not the nationality of a single commander. Then there is the question of capability and experience. Are European generals ready for the sheer scale and complexity of the SACEUR role? For decades, the position has been the capstone for America's most accomplished four-star generals. Yet, to suggest that Europe lacks officers of sufficient caliber is to ignore reality. Senior military leaders from the United Kingdom, France, Germany, and other allied nations regularly hold top commands within the NATO structure and lead complex multinational operations, from the Balkans to Afghanistan. The alliance has a deep bench of talent. A phased transition could further ensure readiness, perhaps by first appointing a European as deputy SACEUR, with a clear path to the top job. Finally, legal and constitutional issues, particularly for the United States, must be carefully navigated. United States law places certain restrictions on its armed forces being under foreign command. However, these obstacles are not insurmountable. The legal framework for NATO operations has been in place for over 70 years, and it is built on the principle of national command coexisting with operational command. American forces would always remain under the ultimate national command of the United States President and Secretary of Defense, even while taking operational direction from a European SACEUR within a pre-agreed NATO mission. The challenge is one of political adaptation, not legal impossibility. The ultimate goal of this transition is not to diminish America's role, but to strengthen the alliance as a whole. A NATO where Europe takes the lead in its own defense is more robust, more resilient, and more equitable organization. It creates a partnership of equals, replacing the old dynamic of protector and protected with one of shared, tangible responsibility. This shift would send the most powerful message of unity and resolve to any potential adversary. It would demonstrate that the alliance has adapted to the realities of the 21st century and is stronger for it, with two powerful pillars supporting its structure instead of just one. Practical solutions can pave the way for a smooth transition. The change does not need to happen overnight. A gradual, phased approach could begin by appointing a highly qualified European general as the deputy SACEUR, a position currently held by a European. This officer could then be groomed for the top command, ensuring continuity and building confidence across the alliance. Another model could involve a rotational command, where the SACEUR is European and the head of one of NATO's other strategic commands, like Allied Command Transformation, is American, ensuring a permanent leadership balance. These are not radical ideas, but sensible evolutions of the current structure. Of course, such a change requires immense political will and, most importantly, trust. The United States must trust its European allies to lead effectively and responsibly, and European nations must trust each other enough to coalesce behind a single commander, overcoming national rivalries and developing a truly collective strategic vision. This is perhaps the greatest challenge, but also the greatest opportunity. The process of deciding on and empowering a European SACEUR would in itself force a level of political and military integration in Europe that has long been an aspiration. It would turn the rhetoric of European strategic autonomy into a working reality within the proven framework of NATO. In conclusion, the question of whether NATO's commander should be European is no longer a fringe academic debate. It is a central strategic imperative for a changing world. It addresses the core issue of burden sharing in its most meaningful form, the sharing of leadership. By embracing this change, the alliance would not be breaking with its past, but building upon its legacy of adaptation. It would create a fairer, more balanced, and ultimately more powerful NATO, ready to meet the threats of today and tomorrow. A European SACEUR would symbolize a new dawn for the alliance, one built on shared sacrifice, mutual trust, and the unwavering collective will to defend its freedom.